Let me start by indicating that there's going to be three parts to this seminar. An introductory 10 minutes where I kind of get you mentally warmed up, if you will, for the theoretical material to follow. Then there's going to be a listing of an actual concrete training program and a break whereby or whereafter Brian Johnson's going to do a practical. So let's just get started here with the introductory material. While I will be providing you today with an actual training program, actually later in the seminar, I want you to know from the outset, ladies and gentlemen, that my purpose today, my primary purpose, is to teach you something meaningful, of value, that is, about a logical approach to the subject of productive bodybuilding exercise. Logic is, after all, man's method of gaining knowledge, which is his means of survival and is therefore of most fundamental value in human existence. Man is not an instinctual creature, as you've been reading about in especially the Weeder magazine. Instincts cannot coexist in a creature whose fundamental defining characteristic is his conceptual or cognitive faculty, which can only be used by a volitional choice. Now, don't let some of these words frighten you. You came here to learn something today, hopefully of value. Where words are new, don't be afraid. Write them down and look them up later on. You might find that they will prove of great value in your future thinking and learning. Instincts, audience, are a form of knowledge that is hardwired into animals and therefore guides them not volitionally by choice, but automatically and unerringly. Man is a conceptual being who gains and uses knowledge only by through an act of choice, a process of thought, or a volitional cognitive effort, as stated previously. And it is because one must exercise his power of choice, specific effort of will to initiate and sustain a process of thought that many just refuse to do it. They apparently find the effort involved too much or not to their liking. As a humorous side note here, years ago when I was working for Joe Weeder out at his offices in Woodland Hills, one of his top editors and I were joking about the Weeder instinctive principle when my cohort had me cracking up saying, Mike, people were to follow their instincts. Here they wouldn't lift weights at all, they would defecate and urinate on them. Wasn't that funny, huh? Having been brought up in an anti-rational culture, many are not taught to value logic and thus never achieve what I refer to as intellectual self-sufficiency. That is, the ability to think logically, rationally, and to judge independently for yourself. What's the use, ladies and gentlemen, of having muscles that would do credit to an adult gorilla when you can't even think effectively about a subject like bodybuilding, which is of passionate concern? Most people have uncritically accepted faith as a means of knowledge. Faith, in fact, is the opposite or the antithesis of reason. It is literally the blind acceptance of ideas for which there is no sensory proof or rational evidence. Along with the idea that you should judge not, you also hear the other admonition, keep an open mind. The idea that one should not judge or that he should keep an open mind is actually very dangerous, literally. It is used to keep you confused by suggesting it is a virtue to plausibility to everything. Obviously, everything can be true. Since some ideas you read about contradict other ideas, how can they all be true? Simple logic. And remember, that's what my purpose is here today. In addition to providing you with an actual training program, I'd like to teach you at least something of value about a logical approach to bodybuilding. No, you should not be concerned with developing an open mind, but an active mind, one that treats ideas critically, seeking to distinguish truth from falsehood. The approach of most bodybuilders to training from the start amounts to little more than a blind leap into the dark. Throughout life, we all, you and I, everybody, were inundated by innumerable theories on every subject, from religion to philosophy, to politics, to the healing arts, nutrition, and bodybuilding science. And because so few in our culture were taught to think rationally or to judge critically, most of us are left disconcertingly confused when confronted with the necessity of making intellectual choices, such as which training theory to employ. In fact, how many bodybuilders, how many people do you know, honestly, possibly including yourself, and I was this way at one time, how many people are not confused on the subject of how to approach bodybuilding exercise? You were confused. Good for you. You're one of the rational few. In fact, I did realize I was like this when I was in my late teens. Most symptomatic was the notion that if something was printed, it had to be true. I learned later that my notion was illogical, as of course not every idea can be true, as I said earlier, because so many of them conflict with and contradict other ideas. In fact, it was R. Jones, who many of you know, or know of, who divested me of that bit of ragtag illogic when he literally barked at me, and that's the way he talks to everyone, "Mike, goddammit, just because something is printed doesn't mean it's true. In fact, 90% of what is printed on all subjects is outright hogwash." And now, some 25 years later, some considerable thought, a lot of study and experience later, I realized that Mr. Jones was in fact being charitable. It's not 90% of what is printed on all subjects is outright hogwash. It's closer to 98%, literally. 98% of what you read. Remember, we do live, that is you and I, as Canadians and Americans, we live in a semi-free country. Can you imagine you imagine all the editors and publishers and writers of all the magazines stay up burning the midnight oil, searching the truth in everything they write? Of course not. Understanding this, audience, is a first step towards developing your critical ability. Your critical ability. The concept of critical ability is new to some people. Like I suggested earlier, you're here today to learn. Just because you hear new concepts, new terms, things that might be unfamiliar, don't just bypass them or let them scare you. Write them down and think about them later and incorporate them into your thinking. As much as this seminar is about the human body and its improvement, this seminar is actually more about the human mind and its improvement. Why? Why would a seminar on bodybuilding also be about the mind? Because obviously, logically, you don't have to be a genius, we all know this on some level of awareness, human intelligence, not instincts, is what makes it possible to understand anything at all, including exercise or bodybuilding science. And that which is most interesting to all of us, namely us, we the member of the species man. As someone once said, the divine spark in the great chain of being. We human beings are the highest of all living species on earth. It has been averred all too often by many, even those in the bodybuilding field, that we bodybuilders are dumb and stupid, which simply isn't true, as evidenced by the number of phone calls I receive every single day, all day long, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I receive phone calls every day from people from all walks of life, including physicists, doctors, chemists, stockbrokers, students, tradesmen, truck drivers, people who were obviously very productive, quite bright and intelligent, who also just happen to be bodybuilders. I will not talk down to you today on the assumption that you, the audience, so lack intellectual depth that you are incapable of exercising the mental effort required to integrate knowledge of a higher order. Nor will I insult your intelligence by expecting you to accept anything that I, Mike Mentzer, have to say merely because I won a handful of bodybuilding contests. So what? Big deal. We have scores of bodybuilders who have won more contests than I have, and they couldn't even spell or define the word exercise science. It is only on the basis of grasping the logic of it that one should agree as to whether or not it's true. Nor will I bore you with the type of intellectual pablum or baby food you've read so often in some of the muscle magazines. Just in case you hadn't noticed, the vast majority of articles written on the subject of training consist of little more than a series of arbitrary, biblical-like commandments. Thou shalt perform of this exercise, and thou shalt perform 5 sets of that one. Why? Never any reason. Blank out. No logic, no explanation. You see, audience, the realm of the intellect, the human mind, which again is the central focus of today's thought, is much more demanding than the average bodybuilder the bodybuilding writer realizes or recognizes. And formulating a valid, non-contradictory theory of training requires knowledge not just of human physiology, but man's method of gaining knowledge, again, logic. A mere passionate discharge of the arbitrary contents of one's subconscious onto a piece of paper is just that, intellectual vomit. As a man of reason, I act on the basis, or I seek to act only on the basis of understanding the reasons for doing something at all, which is the way all human beings should proceed. And that once again is what this seminar is about. I'm not here just to give you another training program and expect you to blindly follow it. Would that be worth the $40 and the time you expended to come here today? This seminar is about a reasoned, principled, logical approach to the subject of productive bodybuilding exercise. One that can be understood by anyone, everyone willing to exercise the required mental effort. I presume, after all, that you came to Mississauga today because of your enthusiastic desire to achieve your muscular potential, maybe for personal reasons, to be Ontario, the Canadian champion. There might even be those in here who aspire to be Mr. Olympia. And, most important, that you, the audience, already understands that the basis of a rational, logical approach to bodybuilding or any other arena of human endeavor is the recognition that only the specific appropriate knowledge can lead you to engage in the purposeful action required to successfully achieve a goal. In fact, that's my favorite statement in the whole seminar. I'm going to repeat it. The basis of a rational, intelligent, logical approach to exercise or any other arena of human endeavor is the recognition that only the specific, appropriate knowledge can lead you to engage in the appropriate action required to achieve a goal. We all kind of sort of know that on some level of awareness, but if you don't explicitly state it periodically, it kind of loses impact in your own thinking. You're here to gain specific knowledge. No, the material in today's seminar is not infinitely complex, but it's not intellectual pabulum either. I am asking you, cast aside all your other concerns for the next few hours, get intense mentally, focus on the logic of my ideas, and once and for all, clear up any and all confusion. That won't be a problem for you since you're already unconfused, and that's fine. I'm not laughing at you. It's no fun being confused, is it? Or uncertain. Then, audience, you will be able to proceed with the greatest power available to a human being, the power of certainty. One of my favorite words, intellectual certainty. Not muscular power, but the power of certainty, which can only be gained when you truly grasp, fully recognize the power of ideas, the realm of the intellect. There does exist a viable intellectual discipline, exercise science. In the next section, remember, this is merely introductory, I will explain the logically interdependent hierarchy of ideas that makes up the context of bodybuilding science, again, so that you, the audience, will leave here not with just one more exercise program, but the ability to think more clearly, logically about the subject, and go on to confidently and successfully achieve your bodybuilding goals and your goals. In fact, while learning to think logically about bodybuilding, you'll learn something about the nature of thought itself, which you can then extend to other areas of life and lead a more rewarding and more fulfilling life overall. Before concluding this introductory section, audience, I'd like to address one important point that will serve, in fact, as a direct prelude to the next part of the talk. And it has to do with the near universal confusion that exists with regard to the fact that there can only be one valid theory of proper, productive bodybuilding exercise, or any other subject for that matter. This subject is essentially responsible for most of the failures in bodybuilding, and I can tell you unequivocally, without any slightest doubt or uncertainty, more bodybuilders fail to achieve their goals than succeed. Most bodybuilders, probably most of you in here like I did at one time, I'm not putting you down, wherever you're at with your thinking, most of you, I was there at one time too, but I'm a little bit older than most of you and I've had more experience. I've learned a lot in the last 20 years. Most bodybuilders make the mistake of approaching the subject of bodybuilding training with the idea that all theories have some merit or are of equal value. Then they waste precious time frantically looking into all these different theories, hoping that somehow, someday, some way, they'll find one that works. And as a result, literally, I'm not exaggerating here for effect, I talk to bodybuilders every day from all over the world, literally every day, all day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and I do a lot of seminars. The most salient characteristic of the vast majority of bodybuilders I meet is that they are confused, and the confusion results in their not achieving their goals. Most bodybuilders literally fail to achieve their goals, which is why they're perpetually asking questions of anybody and everybody they can. They come to seminars all the time. You know what I'm talking about. Again, how many bodybuilders do you know who are not impotently bewildered, disconcertingly confused? At least 99%. In fact, it could not possibly be true that all, or many, or even two training theories are of equal merit. You have to keep in mind here what a theory is. A theory is a set of abstract principles which purports to be either a correct description of some aspect of reality and/or a guide for successful human action. And there is only one reality. Is there anybody here who, there probably is there anybody here who would like to make the point that there's more than one reality? Well, good. We have at least a semi-rational audience. Since there is only one reality, come on, people, obviously there is and can be only one theory of any aspect of reality. Just as there is only one valid theory of epistemology, which is the theory of human knowledge, mathematics, electricity, chemistry, relativity, the theory of evolution. Likewise, there is and can be only one valid theory of productive bodybuilding exercise, and it just so happens to be the theory of high-intensity training. I don't have any weird emotional investment in this thing. It just so happens to be that the one valid, logical, non-contradictory, in fact, It's the only theory. The theory of high-intensity training is the only theory that exists qua theory, which means as the theory is defined. A set of abstract principles, logically connected, which purports to be a correct description of some aspect of reality. The science of exercise, ladies and gentlemen, like the science of medicine, is based on an understanding of the principles of human physiology with a capital H. That means they apply to everybody. After all, unless Pollock and his people are here, I would say we're all members of the species human beings, which of course are universal. That is applicable to all human beings. If every human being's cells, muscles, and organs were constituted and functioned differently, medical science couldn't exist as a viable discipline. Doctors couldn't make diagnoses, perform surgeries, or dispense medicines. It is this precise fact, the fact that the principles of human physiology are obviously universal, is what makes it possible for me to state with absolute, utter, total certainty that there is only one valid logical theory of productive bodybuilding exercise, i.e. one best way to train. It is not my mere opinion that every human being, literally every human being, requires intense training to stimulate growth. It is a well-authenticated fact beyond debate. And because the magnitude of the toll demanded by high-intensity training is very great, such training must be not cautiously regulated, it must be hyper-cautiously regulated with regard to volume and frequency so you don't overtrain. Overtraining, remember, is not just a mistake, it's the biggest mistake you can make. Overtraining is literally that which prevents you from achieving the desired result. Increases in strength and size. And I'll talk more about that later. The major philosophic of this seminar, dear listeners, is that without a firm intellectual grasp of and guidance by a valid theory, one cannot know that he's on the right course. A sane individual setting out on a trip from New York to Los Angeles will consult a map. A map, interestingly enough, is a theory about how to get from point A to point B. Without the map, he would get lost, lose whatever certainty and motivation he may have had, and terminate his effort along the way. Knowledge, like any other value, has to be gained through a volitional effort, an act of choice. Anyone smart, anyone here today, and it's all of you, smart enough to learn the ABCs, write a sentence, or read a book, can, with sufficient effort, integrate the knowledge he gains as a result of today's seminar. Now we get to the intense workout. Recently, one of my phone consultation clients expressed considerable astonishment that he had been able to realize so much uninterrupted progress utilizing heavy-duty, high-intensity training. And I explained to him that should not be a surprise. There's no mystery here. That people have been growing muscles beyond normal levels for tens of thousands of years. That we live in a knowable, rational universe of clear-cut identity, guided by one set of never-changing principles, and that the cause and effect, this is a key concept for those who want to learn to think logically about exercise or anything else, cause and effect. The cause and effect relationship between intense exercise and muscular growth has been understood for at least decades by a few people at least, even though the vast majority of so-called experts in this field have failed to grasp it. I concluded by pointing out to this individual that it is reality and its laws, the laws of nature, you know, that dictate the causes which must be enacted to affect the buildup of muscles beyond normal levels. And that once these causes, these natural laws, are clearly understood, in reality the task of developing bigger muscles, while of course requiring high-intensity effort, is really rather simple. Nature also dictates what mental causes. We were talking earlier, a second ago, about physical causes. Nature, reality, also dictates what mental causes that must be enacted to effect an intellectual understanding of any subject or issue. You must first recognize that all human knowledge has a nature. Your body has a nature, right? Your brain is a part of your body. Your mind is a part of your brain. Your brain and the knowledge therein has a nature, literally. Human knowledge, people, is hierarchical in structure, with a base of fundamental principles or ideas which must be first grasped before moving up the logical ladder. This may be most readily observed, of course, in the field of mathematical science. Now remember, we're here today to talk about exercise science, but we're talking something here in the abstract about the nature of knowledge itself. In mathematical science, or mathematical knowledge, there is a base of fundamentals, which of course are what? Addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. It is only on the basis of first grasping these fundamentals that one may then deal efficaciously with derivatives such as algebra and calculus. The major reason why you, or so many bodybuilders, are confused is that you fail to take the time to gain an understanding that the context of knowledge, which constitutes bodybuilding exercise science, has a base of fundamental principles. The major reason why most bodybuilders are confused is that they don't understand that the context of knowledge, which constitutes bodybuilding exercise science, has a base of fundamental principles. If you want to learn to think logically about exercise, which again is what I presume you came here for, this is the first thing you have to logically understand, that the body of knowledge constituting exercise science has a base, a foundation of fundamental principles. And it ain't that difficult. So you might write this down for your own edification, which relate to the issues of intensity, volume, and frequency. Curious, I told you I talk to bodybuilders every day. Every single day I hear bodybuilders asking questions about training that are something like the equivalent of algebra or calculus when they have not even grasped the simple 2 plus 2 is 4 of bodybuilding. How in the hell are they going to answer the higher level questions when they can't even figure out the simple 2 and 2 is 4? The following, what you're about to hear, will help you gain that knowledge. A logical perspective, as I said earlier, on the subject of productive bodybuilding exercise. Audience, let's approach the subject of what makes muscles grow beyond normal levels like a good exercise scientist might. Now, you have to use your imagination here, because I have yet to meet a good exercise scientist, but just use your imagination a little bit. Having observed innumerable bodybuilders and strength athletes work out, the alleged good exercise scientist concludes that there has to be something about the workout. He looks at these guys training. There has to be some variable, some element, something he can identify and say, hey, look, this particular thing, that's what makes muscles grow, right? Why do you lift weights? There has to be something about the lifting of weights, something you can identify and say, hey, this is the growth stimulus. Logical? What could it be? What is it about the workout that causes the muscle to actually grow? How does he find out? Where does the good exercise scientist launch his investigation? Well, the most likely place is to start by looking at one of the more readily observed qualities or attributes about the things that exist in reality, which is quantity, the volume, the number. In this context, of course, the exercise scientist would concern himself with the number of sets being performed. Since people who perform no weight training exercise possess little muscles or muscles of normal size, and those who do lift weights possess larger muscles, maybe, just perhaps, maybe growth stimulation is directly related to the volume of the exercise. In order to test his hypothesis, or hypothesis as Arthur Jones pronounced it, I'm not sure what the correct pronunciation is, the hypothesis, in order to test his hypothesis, the good exercise scientist observes numerous individuals training over a period of time during which the volume of the exercise grows progressively greater and greater. But something is terribly wrong. Beyond a definite limited point, increased volume results in a complete lack of progress. And any further increase in volume, the subjects inevitably, invariably, in every case, grow weaker and their muscles atrophy. So, what may have initially appeared obvious is not so obvious. The growth stimulus cannot be directly related to the volume, to the quantity of the training effort. Or, if it was, the training subjects who train the most would have the biggest muscles. While the notion that more is better is attractive in its simplicity, it just doesn't work. Let's look for a moment, audience. Let's take a moment and examine the implicit logic in that idea. More is better means literally that. More is better means what? More is better means fucking more is better. You can't fail. There's a built-in guarantee. It's so obvious to so certain of us in here, we wonder why the rest of the world can't grasp it. More is better means more is better. There's a built-in guarantee. You can't fail. If 20 sets are good, if 20 sets give you good results, then why stop there? 40 will give you even better, and 80 even better still, and 120 better still, and just keep training on to infinity. Just take off of work for 3 months, train 18 hours a day, and in 3 months you'll look like Dorian Yates. We'll all succeed. As I'm wont to say in many of my recent articles, the science of productive bodybuilding exercise, for Christ's sakes, is not infinitely complex, but there's a lot more to it than the childlike notion of Joe Weider's more is better. For Joe Weider, more money is better than less. Then in his brilliant thinking, he concludes, well, since more money is better than less, more training has to be better than less. In fact, that one idea has actually hurt Joe himself and the whole bodybuilding, fitness, and nutritional supplement industry. More bodybuilders quit training than stay with it because they try the idea more is better, and after 2 years of no results, they say, I'm either morally deficient, I'm suffering from some who knows what, I can't make it, I'm just going to give up. The most important issue in bodybuilding is that there is a right way to train. Only if people train properly and make progress are the people involved, people like me selling books, doing articles, people selling supplements, are we going to make more money? If half the people who get involved in bodybuilding every decade fall out the next decade, we got to keep drumming up more business, right? So there you are, the obvious tenuity, the monumental absurdity of the volume argument, all wrapped up in a singular, childlike, stupid notion that more is better. As I tell some of my clients, the idea more is better only has validity when it comes to money and pretty girls. It has very little or nothing to do with exercise. The idea that more is better is erroneous, illogical, irrational, non-productive, counterproductive, and on a lesser level, stupid, inane, absurd. It's ridiculous. Look about you, audience, in the gym. Everyone who engages in exercise or athletic training of any sort performs, of course, has to do a certain amount of volume. But if volume was the key in and of itself, the stimulus responsible for triggering growth, those who perform the most exercise in every case would have the largest muscles. And we all know that ain't true. I know people who train for hours, literally hours a day, for years. I know one fellow trained for 7 years using every variation of the volume approach from weeder to serious growth to whatever. And he did get a little bit stronger, but even his girlfriend said, his name is Ali, he said, "Ali, you just have not built any muscle in 7 years." The vast majority of bodybuilders do fail to achieve your goals, and probably, I would guesstimate that 99% of you in here are frustrated too. How many of you in here, looking back over the last year or 2 or 3, adding up the hundreds, even thousands of hours of blood, sweat, and tears, can honestly say that you got a proper return on your investment? One person. You must be a high-intensity trainer. Yeah, that's 2 of you. 2 rational individuals. But we're not giving up on the rest of you, even though we seem like pricks. We're very loving people. We do care about the future of the world. We like to have you be part of it. Yes, everyone and anyone who exercises, whether it's aerobically, anaerobically, athletically, or otherwise, has to perform some volume of exercise. But it may be any volume. As a side note here, later in my talk, I logically demonstrate that, in fact, the issue of volume, number of sets, is a negative factor. Literally, truly, I'm not speaking metaphorically. The issue of volume, number of sets, in bodybuilding exercise science, and Brian is one of the few people who really understands this, is literally a negative. Even 1 set. Doing 1 set represents a negative factor, but we'll go into that later. The vast majority who exercise typically do so for 1 hour. Why 1 hour? Well, most of us conveniently schedule our lives by the hour. We watch Laverne and Shirley by the hour. We get paid by the hour. We go to the psychiatrist by the hour. Therefore, it's only logical. Let's train by the hour. Of course, I'm being facetious. Most people do train by the hour, yet such doesn't invariably result in the same or similar or muscular mass increases. So, where do we now turn to discover the variable? What is that one thing about the exercise, the workout? Where do we now look to discover the element responsible for stimulating growth? Since I just concluded, and you may agree, that it is not the quantity or volume, there is but one place left to go. Not quantity of exercise, but what? The quality or the intensity of the exercise. Let's assume hypothetically that, again hypothetically, that any one of you here could curl a 100-pound barbell for a maximum of 10 reps to failure. And by that I mean you couldn't possibly do 11 reps. The 10th rep itself requires a maximum effort where you're gritting your teeth, you're shaking all over, and you barely get the... Obviously, the first rep of that set would be the easiest. Who would deny that? The first rep would be the easiest, or we would say more technically precise, the first rep would require the least intensity of effort. That first rep does fatigue you a little bit, however, even if only slightly. That's why the second rep is always harder. Whereas the first rep may require literally on the order of 8 or 10 or 12% intensity of effort, the second rep, you see, may require 15 or 20% intensity of effort. The second rep fatigues you even further, of course, and the third rep is harder still, requiring a more intense effort than did the second. Now, I'm not going to belabor this. You know that's how it goes with each successive rep. Each rep is harder than the last. Each successive rep requires a more intense effort. The key concept is intense. until finally we get to the last possible rep in this hypothetical situation, the 10th rep to failure, again where you're trying as hard as you can. That would be the only rep where we say it requires literally 100% intensity of effort. My question to you is this: which rep of that set obviously would be the most, I shouldn't use the word obviously because it sounds like I'm leading you here. Which rep of that set would be the most productive in terms of stimulating an optimal size and strength increase? The first rep, which is the easiest and least intense, or the last rep, the hardest one? The only rep requiring 100% intensity of effort. The last rep. Now, I've had some people in the past say the first rep because they were anxious or they didn't have normal, intact, functioning brains. And that's okay because some people aren't born with normal, intact, functioning brains. Yes, of course, the last rep would be the most productive, not the first rep. In fact, if you could curl, again, hypothetically, 100 pounds for 10 reps. Now, you would never do this, but hypothetically, for some weird, strange reason, you only ever just did the first rep, then you put the bar back down, never attempting a second, third, fourth, fifth rep. Would you ever grow? No. It's too easy. There's not enough intensity of effort. The intensity, to be more specific, the intensity of the stress on the first rep of a set of 10 is not sufficiently threatening to your body to warrant an adaptive response. That is a strength and size buildup. Just like you couldn't get a suntan sitting in front of a 100-watt light bulb. I don't care how long you sat there or how much phosphogene suntan lotion you rubbed all over your belly button. That 100-watt light bulb is not intense enough. The intensity of the stress doesn't threaten your skin sufficiently to warrant an adaptive response. Not a muscle buildup, but a suntan buildup. You see, audience, most people think of developing a suntan or developing larger muscles as something merely cosmetic. And by cosmetic, I mean to improve your appearance. But of course, nature couldn't care less if you were a blonde Adonis on the beach with a 22-inch arm. The development of a suntan, just like the development of larger muscles, both of those things represent literally defensive barriers the body builds to protect itself from future assaults of high-intensity stress, whether high-intensity ultraviolet sunlight stress or high-intensity anaerobic exercise stress. Executing that last, almost impossible rep causes the body to dip into its reserve capacity or ability. And since your body obviously only has a very limited reserve ability, the body protects itself from future assaults on its reserves by enlarging upon its existing ability through the compensatory buildup of more muscle mass. That's probably the most intelligent statement in my whole seminar today. It's very abstract. So this is not a put down. Is there anybody here who'd like me to restate that? I understand. The first time I read that, I had no clue what the hell that meant. But after I understood it, I got so excited you couldn't peel me off the ceiling for 2 days. Listen very carefully. I'll do the third time if required. Executing that last, almost impossible rep causes the body to dip into its reserve ability. Not the first rep, it's too easy. Now, since the body only has a small amount of this reserve to draw upon, since it only has a small amount of this reserve ability to draw upon before depletion occurs, the body protects itself from future assaults on its reserves by enlarging upon its existing ability through the compensatory buildup of more muscle mass. That one statement encapsulates the entire science of bodybuilding exercise, but it's very difficult to grasp on first hearing. That doesn't mean you're stupid, that just means you're not godlike. When you first sat down in kindergarten Did you fully understand the ABCs? I didn't. I was kind of slow. It took me weeks. But now look, you fully understand it. You've integrated the ABCs into words, words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, paragraphs into books. Work with that concept. There were a few people who got excited properly by that. Think about that later on and you'll fully understand the actual science of exercise. Only high-intensity exercise can force the body to resort to this reserve ability once again sufficiently to stimulate an adaptive response in the form of a muscle mass increase. Repeating tasks that are well within your existing capacity do nothing to stimulate growth. If you can curl 100 pounds for 10 reps and all you ever try is 10, the body has no reason to grow. You have to attempt tasks that are beyond your existing capacity. That's what stimulates growth. And of course, how does the bodybuilding orthodoxy and exercise science have you train? Not to failure. Oh no, there's something apocalyptic, frightening, dire. Don't train to failure. You might grow a third eyeball or hair on your tongue. Don't train to failure. It's dangerous. Well, Brian Johnston and I and a bunch of at least tens of thousands of others in the world have been training to failure for 20 years. It never bothered me. There's nothing wrong with training to failure. You have to train to failure to stimulate a strength and size increase. Again, this is the point. Repeating tasks, T-A-S-K-S, repeating tasks that are well within your existing capacity do nothing to stimulate because you can already do it. Your body already has the capacity to curl 100 pounds for 10 reps. It's only when you try that impossible 11th rep that you stress the existing capacity, you stress or endanger the existing reserve, and the body seeks to protect the reserve by enlarging upon its existing capacity so that no longer will that 11th rep seem like a threat. Did you follow that? Okay, thank you. I could leave right now. I feel fulfilled. Carrying a set to the point where you are forced to utilize 100% of your momentary muscular ability, audience, is the single most important factor in increasing strength and size. Working to a point of momentary muscular failure, where another rep is impossible despite your greatest effort, ensures that you pass through the breakover point, or that point in the set below which you go and growth will not be stimulated, and above which you grow and growth will be stimulated. Interesting to note here, even the detractors of high-intensity training force theory have to admit that the last rep of a set is the most productive. Think about it. All these people, many of them knuckleheads, who claim high-intensity training theory is bunk. Now, what's the first principle of the theory of high-intensity training? The principle of intensity. When they say high intensity doesn't work, there's no validity, that's like saying the first rep is better than the last. So if you can curl 100 pounds for 10 reps, just do one rep. Forget the last 9, because intensity doesn't matter. Come on. I had a client of mine, he's now a client. I was telling Brian this earlier. He called me several months ago. He was in a quandary. He said, Mike, I don't know. I'm awfully confused. I don't know if I should sign up with you or Charles Poliquin. His name is Max. I said, Max, if you're that confused and you can't see on the face of it the difference between Charles Poliquin and I really don't want you to sign up with him. You deserve each other. Anybody who denies, this is the point, all the semi-jokes aside, if you believe that the first rep of a set to failure is better than the last rep of a set, you're either so stupid that you don't deserve my presence, as Arthur Jones used to say, or you just got something very wrong with you. Obviously, the last rep of a set to failure is the most productive. Now, there have been a few individuals, not necessarily high-intensity advocates, who have raised the intelligent question I'm not saying everybody who's against high intensity has no intelligence. They're just on their developmental way to finally embracing this. And I mean that sincerely. A few individuals have raised the intelligent question as to whether it is actually necessary to train to failure. They say, Mike, how do you know for sure that 100% intensity of effort is absolutely required to stimulate growth? Maybe it's only 60% or 82 or 91. It's a good question. How do we know? Well, the problem here, audience, would be one in measuring intensity. There are, in fact, only two perfectly accurate measures of intensity. 0% when you're totally at rest, and 100% intensity when you're exerting yourself with maximum effort. So long, here's the point, so long as you are exerting yourself with 100% intensity of effort, you will have passed through every possible breakover point. 62%, 79, 84, 93. As long as you go to 100, you pass through every possible growth stimulation point, you see. That's why we keep stressing train to failure. It's not going to hurt you. Not only is it desirable, it's absolutely necessary so that you know you stimulated growth. Does that help anybody? Most of you know this already. No? It's new material. Some of this is a little bit abstract, I know. But if you listen, you take notes, and you reflect on what you wrote down later. Again, just like the first time you sat down in kindergarten, you didn't fully understand the ABCs. Think about this stuff later, and you'll learn to think logically about exercise, so you won't have to keep running compulsively to the newsstands every month, grabbing up a handful of magazines, running home, locking the bedroom door, tearing the phone out of the wall and scavenging the pages for 4 hours, hoping that someday you'll find a magic routine. That's like playing Russian roulette with your life. It doesn't work. Man's specific physiological characteristics dictate what training causes must be adapted to achieve the desired effect. That is, an optimal increase in strength and size. Not my opinion, not the whim, the will, or the wishes of the majority, but nature. Nature requires what you've got to do to stimulate growth. The primary causal determinant, the first cause, the most important thing in simpler language, is unequivocally, without a doubt, the imposition again of a high-intensity training stress. And while the imposition of a high-intensity training stress is a first necessary cause, it is not sufficient cause to effect an optimal increase. There is another very important physiological characteristic which must be considered, one that has been perpetually ignored by the bodybuilding orthodoxy, by exercise science, and more likely than not by you. This particular idea, this physiological characteristic, has been ignored, which is why most of you here today have failed to achieve your strength and bodybuilding goals. And I again aver with absolute utter certainty that the majority of you in here today are frustrated, having failed to come even close to your bodybuilding goals. And you know I'm right. I'm not omniscient. I don't have a crystal ball. Because I simply logically understand the laws of nature. And I know that you're violating the laws of nature. You're not doing what reality requires to stimulate increases in strength and size. Wow. Those who are unaware of the nature, role, and value of fundamental principles, remember at the outset I described what fundamental principles are. Those who are unaware of the role of fundamental principles usually have a very difficult, if not impossible, time achieving their goals.